There was no mountain of evidence, in my mind. They thought, we got our guy. They talk about trail of blood and this and that. Well, why don't you follow the trail of Mark Fuhrman? O.J. Simpson does not have time to slaughter his wife.
More than 3 decades have passed since the brutal 1994 murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. Yet the case that once transfixed the world refuses to fade into silence. O.J. Simpson's acquittal in 1995 stunned a divided nation, turning a criminal trial into a cultural flashpoint that exposed deep rifts in race, justice, and celebrity influence. But in the years since, all the facts have been laid bare. The O.J. Simpson mystery has finally been solved, and it isn't good. Instead, it's deeply unsettling. Let's unveil the whole truth today. The murders and trial. On the night of June 12, 1994, the quiet neighborhood of Brentwood in Los Angeles was shaken by a brutal double homicide. Nicole Brown Simpson, the 35-year-old ex-wife of Orenthal James, O.J. Simpson, and 25-year-old Ronald Goldman, a waiter and friend of Nicole's, were found dead just outside the front steps of her townhouse at 875 South Bundy Drive. Both had been stabbed multiple times with a knife, their bodies lying in pools of blood. Nicole's dog was found barking incessantly, which led neighbors to discover the bodies around midnight. Nicole had deep wounds to her throat, while Ron Goldman appeared to have fought back, sustaining defensive wounds. O.J. Simpson, a former NFL Hall of Famer, actor, and commercial pitchman, had divorced Nicole in 1992 after a tumultuous and allegedly abusive marriage. The police were immediately suspicious. Blood evidence at the crime scene at Simpson's Rockingham estate 4 miles away, and inside his white Ford Bronco, appeared to connect him to the murders. Investigators discovered a bloody glove at the crime scene and a matching glove near Simpson's guest house. DNA testing, though relatively new at the time, confirmed that the blood found at various locations matched Simpson, Nicole, and Goldman. However, the case quickly turned from a straightforward murder investigation into one of the most divisive and closely watched criminal trials in U.S. history. Simpson was formally charged with the murders on June 17, 1994, but instead of surrendering to the LAPD, he became the subject of a nationally televised low-speed pursuit in a white Ford Bronco driven by his friend Al Cowlings. The chase lasted over 2 hours and was watched live by an estimated 95 million people across the United States. The event froze the nation, interrupting NBA Finals coverage and news broadcasts, and signaled the beginning of the trial of the century. Simpson pleaded not guilty on July 22, 1994. His defense team, dubbed the Dream Team, was led by renowned attorneys Johnny Cochran, Robert Shapiro, F. Lee Bailey, Alan Dershowitz, Barry Scheck, and Robert Kardashian. They went head-to-head with prosecutors Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden. The trial began on January 24, 1995, and was broadcast daily on television, drawing millions of viewers. In total, the jury heard over 100 witnesses and reviewed thousands of pieces of evidence across 133 days of testimony. A critical aspect of the defense strategy was to shift attention away from the forensic evidence and focus on the conduct of the LAPD. Much of the case's controversy centered on Detective Mark Fuhrman, who had found key evidence, including one of the bloody gloves. During the trial, tapes emerged of Fuhrman using racial slurs and discussing police misconduct. Under cross-examination, Fuhrman invoked the Fifth Amendment when asked whether he had planted evidence in the case. This moment critically damaged the prosecution's credibility and allowed the defense to argue that Simpson was being framed because he was a black man. DNA evidence presented by the prosecution was strong, though complex and ahead of its time for many jurors. Blood found in Simpson's Bronco, on the driveway of his home and on a pair of socks in his bedroom matched the victims. However, questions about contamination, mishandling by LAPD personnel, and improper storage of the samples were repeatedly raised by the defense, creating reasonable doubt. One of the trial's most iconic and controversial moments came on June 15, 1995, during the prosecution's presentation of physical evidence. Prosecutor Christopher Darden made the strategic decision to have O.J. Simpson try on a pair of gloves, one of which was found at the murder scene on Nicole Brown Simpson's property, and the other behind Simpson's guest house at his Rockingham estate. These blood-stained Aris isotoner gloves were believed by the prosecution to have been worn by the killer during the double homicide. However, in front of the jury, media, and millions watching live on television, Simpson struggled to pull the gloves over his hands. He appeared to strain and splay his fingers, and the gloves seemed too tight. This single visual moment dramatically shifted public perception. Defense attorney Johnny Cochran seized the opportunity and delivered one of the most memorable lines in legal history during his closing argument. "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." The jury, composed of 9 African Americans, 2 whites, and 1 Hispanic, deliberated for less than 4 hours. On October 3, 1995, O.J. Simpson was found not guilty of both murders. The verdict caused a massive public reaction. Polls conducted in the days following the decision revealed a stark racial divide. Approximately 70% of Black Americans agreed with the verdict, compared to only 25% of white Americans. The trial, while centered on murder charges, had become a cultural lightning rod for conversations on race, policing, celebrity, and justice in America. Following his acquittal, Simpson faced continued legal and financial battles. On October 23, 1996, the families of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman filed a wrongful death civil lawsuit against him. Unlike in a criminal trial, the burden of proof in civil court is preponderance of the evidence, rather than beyond a reasonable doubt. This legal threshold allowed the plaintiffs to present much of the same evidence, but with different rules regarding admissibility and interpretation. The civil trial began in Santa Monica, California on October 23, 1996, and lasted until February 4, 1997. During the proceedings, Simpson was required to testify, something he did not do during the criminal trial. The civil jury reviewed the same DNA evidence, including blood drops and hair fibers, along with new testimony regarding Simpson's history of domestic violence. They also heard directly from the victims' families, particularly Fred Goldman, Ron's father, who gave impassioned pleas for justice and accountability. On February 4, 1997, the jury found O.J. Simpson liable for the wrongful deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. The verdict awarded $8.5 million in compensatory damages to the Goldman family and an additional $25 million in punitive damages, split between the Brown and Goldman families, totaling $33.5 million. Although Simpson owned properties and had assets, he declared that he was unable to pay the full damages. Under California law, however, pensions and certain retirement funds, such as those from his time in the NFL, were protected from seizure, limiting the plaintiff's ability to collect the judgment. As a result, the Goldman family spent years pursuing Simpson's assets and income streams. In 2007, they won the rights to his unpublished manuscript, If I Did It, and later published it with the subtitle Confessions of the Killer, turning the proceeds over to offset the damages. This book is central to solving the mystery. Why? Because it is, in fact, a confession. The book, If I Did It. In 2006, more than a decade after his acquittal in the 1994 murders, of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman, O.J. Simpson became the center of fresh controversy with the announcement of a new book project titled If I Did It. The book was originally conceived as a hypothetical account in which Simpson would explain how he might have committed the murders, had he actually done them. The concept immediately triggered public outrage, as many believed Simpson was capitalizing on a crime for which he had already been found civilly liable in 1997. The book was ghostwritten by Pablo Fenves, a veteran writer who had lived near Nicole Brown Simpson in Brentwood at the time of her murder and testified for the prosecution during the criminal trial. The project was initially developed under the direction of Judith Regan, the then head of Regan Books, an imprint of HarperCollins. Simpson was paid in advance of $600,000 for the book, though the actual terms were obscured by the use of intermediaries and shell companies to help him avoid paying the $33.5 million civil judgment owed to the Goldman and Brown families. The book was scheduled for release in late 2006, and Fox even announced a two-part television special hosted by Judith Regan, in which Simpson would discuss the hypothetical details. Titled O.J. Simpson. If I Did It, Here's How It Happened. The interview was to air in November. However, the backlash was immediate and intense. Victims' rights groups, public figures, and media outlets condemned the project. The families of both victims also protested loudly, calling the book and the planned interview grotesque and exploitative. Amid mounting pressure, News Corporation, parent company of both HarperCollins and Fox, canceled the book's publication and the TV special on November 20, 2006, just days before they were set to launch. Despite its cancellation, a few advance copies of If I Did It had already been distributed, and the manuscript's contents became known to the public. In the book, Simpson presents a chilling and highly detailed hypothetical scenario that closely mirrors the known facts of the 1994 crime. He begins by recounting the events of June 12, 1994, introducing a fictional accomplice named Charlie, a character never mentioned in any police or legal investigations. Simpson claims that Charlie informed him of Nicole's alleged behavior and accompanied him to her condominium on Bundy Drive. Once there, Simpson describes confronting Nicole, an argument escalating, and eventually both victims ending up dead. He provides details of the encounter that match the forensic evidence from the actual crime scene, including the location of the bodies, the wounds sustained, and the presence of a knit cap and gloves. What makes the book especially disturbing to many readers is how the hypothetical tone gradually gives way to what feels like a factual retelling. For example, Simpson writes that he blacked out during the killings and only came to afterward, with blood on his clothes and a knife in his hand. The defense of dissociation or memory lapse is a common theme among individuals accused of violent crimes. Experts, including forensic psychologists and legal analysts, have argued that this literary framing device, a hypothetical confession paired with blackout, might be a psychological strategy to create emotional and legal distance from the acts described, while still revealing inner truths. The inclusion of Charlie is also seen by some experts as a tool to externalize blame or project guilt onto a fictitious entity. This way, Simpson could recount the events without fully owning them. Following the collapse of the original publication plan, the Goldman family moved to claim the rights to the book to satisfy part of the unpaid civil judgment. In July 2007, a Florida bankruptcy court awarded the Goldmans the publishing rights and proceeds from If I Did It. The family republished the book through Beaufort Books in September 2007, adding a new introduction by the Goldman family and forensic commentary. The title was modified to emphasize guilt. If I Did It, Confessions of the Killer. The word "if" was shrunk to near invisibility on the book cover, so the title appeared to read, I Did It. The re-release of the book reignited debate. Legal experts, including former prosecutor Christopher Darden, who had served on the original trial team, called the book a confession in all but name. Darden argued that the language, sequence of events, and forensic alignment of the narrative showed intimate knowledge that only the killer would possess. Similarly, Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, who had defended Simpson during the 1995 trial, remarked that while the book wasn't legally actionable due to double jeopardy protections, it was morally damning. Forensic experts also noted how closely the hypothetical scenario matched blood spatter patterns, wound placement, and other crime scene elements documented by the LAPD in 1994. But wait, the glove did not fit. What do we make of that? Well, let's solve this mystery once and for all. The O.J. Simpson mystery finally solved. On June 15, 1995, in front of a captivated jury and a national television audience, O.J. Simpson attempted to try on a pair of leather gloves, one found at the crime scene and the other at his Rockingham estate. To the shock of many, the gloves appeared too tight, and Simpson struggled to pull them over his hands. Defense attorney Johnny Cochran seized the moment and delivered the now famous line, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." But why didn't the glove fit? Well, let's get one thing straight. These were Simpson's gloves. However, by the time of the trial, the gloves had significantly changed from their original state. These Aris Isotoner light gloves, size extra large, had been soaked in blood, frozen, and then thawed multiple times for forensic testing before being presented in court. Leather is an organic material that reacts to such changes in temperature and moisture. Forensic glove expert Richard Rubin later explained that this process likely caused the gloves to shrink, stiffen, and lose their original flexibility. In their altered state, they may no longer have their original fit. Second, Simpson wore latex gloves underneath during the demonstration. This was an added precaution to avoid contamination of evidence. However, these thin gloves may have added friction and resistance, making it more difficult for him to slide the tight leather gloves over his hands. The jury may not have been aware of the subtle yet significant impact of this barrier. Another important factor is that Simpson's hands may have changed in size between the night of the murders and the day of the courtroom demonstration. Arthritis in his hands and the fact that he had stopped taking his anti-inflammatory medication in the weeks leading up to the trial may have caused swelling or reduced dexterity. Some analysts, including members of the prosecution, later suspected that Simpson may have intentionally stopped his medication to ensure his hands would swell, thereby preventing the gloves from fitting properly during the demonstration. Moreover, photographs and testimonies revealed that Simpson had previously worn similar gloves. Nicole Brown Simpson had purchased the exact model of Aris Isotoner gloves for him in 1990. The size, extra large, was consistent with his hand size, and glove expert Rubin confirmed that the gloves found at the crime scenes were consistent in make, model, and wear pattern with those previously owned by Simpson. Then there's the book. Christopher Darden, a former Los Angeles County prosecutor who had served on the team that tried Simpson in the original 1995 criminal case, has stated unequivocally that he believed the book constituted a confession. He emphasized that the level of detail in Simpson's narrative mirrored the forensic evidence presented during the trial. Darden pointed out that the book included knowledge only the killer could have possessed, such as specific positions of the bodies, the sequence of the attack, and the psychological underpinnings of the crime. He argued that Simpson's narrative was not only internally coherent, but also aligned disturbingly well with the crime scene analysis, autopsy reports, and timeline established by investigators in 1994. According to Darden, Simpson's description of events, particularly his admission to being at Nicole's residence with a knife and blacking out before discovering the carnage was too precise and conveniently framed to be purely speculative. Legal scholars such as Alan Dershowitz, who had actually served on Simpson's defense team during the 1995 trial, have also commented on the book's implications. While Dershowitz stopped short of calling it a confession, he acknowledged in interviews that the narrative presented a damning portrayal of events. In a 2007 interview with CNN, Dershowitz noted that if I Did It had been available during the original trial, it could have significantly altered the public's perception and potentially swayed the jury had it been admissible. He emphasized, however, that due to the principle of double jeopardy, Simpson could not face a new criminal trial, regardless of what the book suggested. The Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution guarantees that no person shall be tried twice for the same offense after acquittal. This legal barrier remains intact even in the face of overwhelming new circumstantial or even direct evidence. Psychologists and behavioral experts have long scrutinized the tone and structure of O.J. Simpson's controversial book, If I Did It, viewing it as a disturbing window into his psyche. Forensic psychologist Dr. Park Dietz, who has consulted on infamous cases like those of Jeffrey Dahmer and Andrea Yates, noted that Simpson's storytelling bears the hallmarks of individuals trying to rationalize or emotionally distance themselves from violent acts. One clear example is Simpson's fictional accomplice, Charlie, whom he repeatedly blames during the narrative. According to Dietz, this distancing serves as a psychological mechanism that allows Simpson to explore the events without taking full responsibility. Simpson also repeatedly refers to a mental blackout during the murders, another tactic often associated with dissociation and guilt suppression. Another alarming detail is the complete lack of remorse in Simpson's account. Instead of expressing regret, he spends much of the book criticizing Nicole Brown, making baseless claims about her substance use and personal life, while painting himself as a wronged man. Critics argue this deflection supports the idea that the book is more than just hypothetical. It reads like a rationalization. Veteran journalist Dominic Dunn, who covered the case for Vanity Fair, called the book the closest thing we'll ever get to a confession. In a 2006 promotional interview for a now-canceled Fox TV special, Simpson disturbingly joked about the murders. In 2018, Fox aired O.J. Simpson, The Lost Confession, which included unreleased footage from the 2006 interview. In it, Simpson narrated the events using first-person language before quickly shifting blame back to Charlie. Experts like former FBI profiler Jim Clemente pointed to this as a subconscious admission of guilt. Though he died a free man on April 10, 2024, he was most certainly guilty of murder. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.